This is the free motion quilting tutorial for Graffiti Art Curved. This is a design very similar to graffiti art, a design that we learned last week, but this design is curved so that all of the lines are meant to be very nice and soft and flowing, and this is meant to look more like your personal penmanship, how you write in cursive. This is how graffiti art curved should look. And I created this design because I realized how different the textures are whenever you write a word in block letters, straight lines and sharp angles, as with graffiti art, and how different that looks whenever you write in cursive. And so really they are two different designs. Even though the idea is the same, even though you stitch them similarly, I really think that they are two different textures and should be called two different names. So here you can see I'm stitching out the word. And with a little practice, it is easy enough to stitch the word without marking it, but I found that for placement generally in a quilt, it is actually better if you just go on ahead and mark the word, and that way you don't have any spelling issues. That was kind of the unfortunate thing about the other graffiti art, is I misspelled a word and had to rip some out and then go back to it. So that's a little frustrating. You might want to, go on ahead and mark it, and then if you start worrying that things are not marking, or it's not looking right, or maybe you want a more decorative font than you can really kind of pull out of the air, try using a word processor. Just type out the words and play with different fonts, and then mark that on your quilt. And then once you get the font down that you like and have a decorative look to it, then all you have to do is go over it and echo quilt it, like you can see me doing right now. And echo quilting is very, very simple. A lot of people do it in many different ways. You can either use the edge of your quilting foot as a guide, or you can kind of look at the kind of gap between the line of quilting you've just stitched and the line of quilting you're stitching now. Whichever way you do it, and there's no real right way or wrong way to do it, just make sure that you're keeping a consistent distance between the lines that you're stitching, so that if you're echoing 1/8 of an inch away in one space, that you are echoing 1/8 of an inch away in all spaces, so that way it stays nice and consistent throughout. If you want your word to stand out a little bit more, with graffiti art, I made the point that this is a way of quilting words onto your quilt so that they're not noticeable, so that they kind of blend in and look like a texture. But if you want that to really show up and show off, one idea would be to double the amount of thread. So stitch it once and then go back through and stitch it again, literally travel stitching right on top of your word, and that will build up the thread over your letters and allow it to show off and stand out a lot more than it would if you just had one single line of thread. And that's what I did whenever I was stitching the words on to one of my quilts. I used graffiti art and graffiti art curved in Sinkhole, one of my quilts, and instead of just leaving one single line of thread in one area, whenever I was stitching the curving lines and the curving words, I actually went through and travel stitched a second time, so essentially stitched the words twice on the quilt, and that allowed them to stand out very, very nicely and really built up that thread just a little bit more so that the words were much more obvious. Another idea, if you wanted to try it, would be to hand stitch the words into your quilt, and that is even more kind of intimate as far as a connection with the fiber and actually getting those words out and into your quilt. And then once you have hand stitched or hand embroidered those words on, then again to go in and echo quilt them. So those are several different ideas what you can do with this stitch. I hope you run with it. And here's what it looks like when you quilt graffiti art curved. For over 200 videos on free motion quilting, plus loads of tools and supplies for this wonderful hobby, check out daystyledesigns.com.